2016 Cabin Fever Debates. We are delighted to have you here tonight to consider the motion that parents should be permitted to use genetic editing to modify embryos, both to suppress negative traits and to select positive traits. So, if you like the idea of creating your own model designer baby, you've come to the right debate. Several things will help you enjoy tonight's debate. We use a format of debate that is exactly the same format as we use in competitions, and our Seawolf debaters travel to tournaments around the nation and around the world. A couple of things about that format of debate. There are two sides, like any format of debate. These people on this side are the proposition. They're arguing on behalf of the motion. The four people over here are on the opposition. They're arguing against the motion. Each one of these speakers gets 1 7-minute speech during which to make their best arguments either for or against the motion. We'll start with somebody from the proposition, alternate back and forth between the proposition and the opposition, until each debater has had that 1 7-minute opportunity to make their best arguments. During each of those 7-minute speeches, you're going to hear a series of bells. Those bells sound like this. You're going to hear one bell after the first minute of each speech, and another bell when there's 1 minute remaining in each speech. In that middle 5 minutes of each speech, members of the opposing side can ask points of information. Points of information are brief interruptions in the form of a short argument or a question posed to the speaker that are taken exclusively at the discretion of the person holding the floor. So if the primary speaker is making his or her argument, and a member of the opposition wants to ask them a point of information, they would rise, and that indicates their desire to ask that point of information. But it's at the discretion of the person at the podium whether or not to give them that opportunity. So you might see them saying, go ahead, ask your point, or you alternately might see them saying, not at this time, or simply waving them down. They're not being rude. They're expected to manage their interactions with the other team, but to take enough points of information to make sure that there is that discussion that is going on throughout the debate. At the end of 7 minutes, you'll hear 2 bells. That means your time has elapsed. The speakers get a 15-second grace period after that to wrap their argument up. At the end of that 7 minutes, 15 seconds, the bell will ring continuously. People will start clapping. You won't be able to hear the speaker, so that person should then sit down. Beyond that, the type of debate we participate in loves audience interaction. If there's an argument that particularly resonates with you, some position that is articulated that you agree with, you should by all means let the debaters know. The traditional way of doing that is to pound on something and say, here, here. It's good to practice that now so you don't feel uncomfortable during debate, so pound on something and say, here, here. So feel free to offer that support to the debaters when they're making an argument with which you disagree. This is, as I said earlier, our third debate in what will be a series of 8 debates over the course of this month that we're participating in the Cabin Fever debates. From each of these preliminary debates, including this one that we're going to watch tonight, we will select one team to send on to our semifinal round, which means that there are 2 teams on the proposition and 2 teams on the opposition. Of these 4 teams, one of them will be selected to go through to our semifinal round. At the end of the debate, we'll ask for the audience's attitude about the motion itself, whether you support or oppose genetic editing of fetuses. But our judges, our panel of judges, who are 5 debaters from the Seawolf debate program, will make the selection of the team that they believe did the best job, both of advancing their arguments and presenting those arguments in a way that was appealing to the audience. With that, then, I am delighted to turn the control of the House over to Demery Mevin, who is going to be our Speaker of the House for this evening, and ask him to call the House to order and entrust our panel of judges, chaired by Sarah Elton, to consider the round carefully. So, Demery, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. So, on the motion of permitting parents to use genetic editing technology, we now call the first proposition Mr. Jacob Tatum, representing the Team D's, to speak on the motion. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the world is becoming more and more competitive, but also technology is becoming more and more advanced. We, as the state, allow parents to do nearly everything within their power to provide a better outcome for their child. This includes the freedom for parents to choose their spouse, what food to give their child, and even what extracurricular activities they want their child to pursue. It is because of this that we believe that the right to embryonic gene editing reasonably falls in line with the aforementioned parental rights, because it is exercised by parents in order to position their children favorably in society. We will support this. I have 2 main points of construction. The first is the role of parents and guardians, and our second is why the state is not justified in intervening in this case. But first, let me explain our model. model is actually really pretty inclusive. We would allow parents to access technology to select positive traits for the children and deselect negative traits. So what does this mean? Negative traits, which we mentioned would probably be the vast majority of what parents would be selecting for. Selecting out negative traits would be things like a genetic susceptibility to degenerative brain disease or things like sickle cell anemia. We would allow for parents to select to get rid of these traits. We believe that this will make society more efficient, and it would be good for society because there would be less burden on healthcare and whatnot. Just one second. Positive traits would be if you wanted your child to have better bone strength so that they can compete more fairly with athletics. But we would also include aesthetic things like skin color, hair color, and eye color. And believe me, I did say skin color. Okay. Go ahead, man.
So on bone strength, how is that going to be fair for the athletes who are just normally birthed into the process and just have to deal with what they have? Now you're creating a superhuman to be able to compete.
Well, in this case, think about it from the perspective of the parent. There's many diseases, very debilitating diseases, such as Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, in which the life expectancy is barely over 30 years. What kind of life is that? So I think it's there's always balancing the rights of those that are negatively affected and those that benefit from this. So I think those parents would be far out. Thank you for that. So the role of the parents. So parents are there. Parents are there to put their children in the best position to succeed. We think that we already see this in society, which kind of goes to your question. We allow for parents to use the technology of education and put their children in private schools, which probably costs more, which is to give their children an upper hand on those that go to public school. So these already exist. We think that this falls in line with that. I'll take you.
So I'm a little bit confused about what you mean by gene susceptibility. Are genes not already the thing that exists that are susceptible to your procedures, or?
Sure. Just a clarification. I meant that there's certain genetics that may be predisposed to certain conditions. For example, African Americans and Latinos, their genetics make them more susceptible to things like sickle cell anemia, or people of Northern European descent are more susceptible to cystic fibrosis. So that's what that means. So like I said, so who are these parents that would be selecting this? The vast majority of them would be the people that are getting rid of the negative traits. Who could argue with that? You don't want your kid to have cystic fibrosis. That would be the vast majority of them, and we think ultimately this would be good for society. There's also positive traits. This could be anything from, like I said, the bone structure, but things like skin color. I know that sounds a little controversial or whatever, but we recognize that inequality exists, privilege exists, things like white privilege exists. Firstly, say if you grew up in an area where there's a lot of sun, like if you grew up in Kenya, you're at a disadvantage if you have lighter skin. If you wanted to raise a family in that region, we think you should have access to, make it so that you can live where you want to live. Similarly, in American society, there's many statistics that show that if you're black, you're much more likely to be arrested for crimes, and also even be killed by the police. So we recognize that these inequalities exist and that privileges exist, and we defend the right of parents to essentially capitalize on that. I'll take you.
So you are supporting homogeny and trying to crush diversity?
No, I'm saying that people can, because there are these privileges and inequality that does exist, we recognize that. We're allowing for parents to make the decisions that they think are best for themselves and their children. I also mentioned that the negative traits, getting these negative things like susceptibility to cystic fibrosis, that would be less and less, or more and more out of the overall gene pool. The things like the positive traits, the so-called designer babies, that would be less proportion. I already taken 3, sorry. That would make up a smaller proportion of who is using this technology. So that brings me to our second point of construction, which is why the state is not justified in intervening in this case. Well, I think the first question to ask is, when do we disallow the state to intervene? Largely when the child is in danger, things like that. With that, is the child in danger in this situation? No. Is the parent acting within the best interests of their child? Yes, we believe that is so. So we don't think that the state has any justification to prohibit doing this. Thank you. So yeah, we think that what we're trying to do is really balance this idea of, both shaping the child, the parental interest of shaping the child, and also accepting the child. We think that this really balances those. We allow them to make sure that their child doesn't have to suffer from bad diseases, but it also allows for the broader gene pool to be respected.
We thank the first proposition speaker for speaking on his point, and now we welcome the leader of opposition, Lakota Tow, from the team Powdered Donuts, to speak on his behalf of the case. Hear, hear.
All right, thank you everybody for coming here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To deconstruct a little bit, I don't think we made our point clear. How can controlling someone's skin color even make anything equal or unequal? We're just going to create another race of different people, multicolor, why not? Come on. But now to get into my construction, the opposition is explicitly against the permission of parents to genetically alter their embryos. Right now there's a program called CRISPR, and it's being used to study the development of embryos for educational purposes. This is done by genetically altering the embryos with the CRISPR program. But we're not going to be talking about that today. Today's debate is the permission of parents to use genetic editing to modify embryos. So it's the application of this CRISPR program to suppress negative traits and to select positive traits. But what does this even mean? With such an ambiguous question of application, it's open to our interpretation to decide what it is we are permitting parents to do. For the sake of variety, I will provide a couple of possible applications and explain why those applications are ethically absurd and should not be proposed so loosely without the proper mediation of consequences, both in the short and long term. I have 2 reasons. Argument number 1, permitting genetic editing for parents in order to suppress negative genetic diseases will ultimately create dependence on editing programs to perpetuate the human race. Number 2, permitting genetic editing for parents who want to design their babies will lead to civil disputes over the equality between humans who are designed and those who are not. First of all, we would essentially be tainting the human gene pool because we are permanently introducing new man-made genetic codes to the pool with no idea how this will turn out in the long run. Secondly, the likelihood of eradicating genetic diseases is slim to none. Programs like CRISPR will not come cheap to consumers. We are talking about a program that could possibly improve the welfare of humans, although likely it won't.
I should mention that a disease like polio, a crippling disease, has essentially almost been wiped out due to new technology. So I would take that.
There are other means. We do not have to do genetic coding to get into all those problems. So presenting CRISPR as a possible solution to all those who do suffer from genetic diseases or conditions is poppycock and downright irresponsible. We have a duty to our future generations of humans. But first, we have an obligation to the current genetic line and perpetuating our future human race. In the end, there's a paradox. Let's say we are able to successfully rid the world, first world, of all the major genetic diseases and conditions. What's preventing the natural process of genetic mutation from creating a variety of more complex and devastating genetic diseases later down the line? We will eventually become reliant on programs like CRISPR to manufacture perfectly healthy offsprings in order to perpetuate the human species. And this is not beginning to sound like Gattaca or Brave New World. You are not paying attention to the serious ramifications. Permitting the usage of CRISPR for fighting genetic diseases is opening the door to even bigger problems, and maybe even a world to where people no longer copulate to create offsprings. Rather, babies are created in the lab and pumped out to serve their function in society. I sure don't want to live in a more dystopian-like reality. This brings me to argument number 2. Permitting genetic editing for parents who want to design their babies may lead to civil disputes over the equality between humans who are designed and those who are not. Firstly, we lose sight of the inherent value of human life if we are to adopt the vision of designed offspring. This is because permitting genetic altering of negative to positive traits is directly stating that there is something lacking currently in the genetic pool. And to claim that makes me question what I am, or even all of you are worth, if we are to be compared in society to someone who is arbitrarily genetically modified to some aspect of perfection. Yes?
I would just mention that it's not always what's lacking. Something like Down syndrome, that's due to an extra set of chromosomes. So I think we need to think about that. Yeah, it's not perfect as it is. The status quo is not perfect as it is, and we're for parents choosing what's best.
And I agree with that, but am I going to say someone with Down syndrome is less valuable because they do have we're discussing genetic altering and efforts of fighting genetic diseases. I'm now explaining the possible ethical and sociological ramifications of permitting parents to willy-nilly pick and choose what their babies will look like. Some questions to consider on this matter. Will permitting designer babies lead to a segregated class of human species? Even yet, will it drastically change the germline of the human race into something completely different? Would those designed even be considered human anymore? These are serious questions with real-life plausibilities. Someone can easily alter the genetic code so much to the point where we begin to see physical adaptations that are non-human-like. Consider what some of those genetic codes will come from. If you implant a code from another human into my code, at what point do I no longer be me? Does that even change anything? Maybe not. But I think it's something to consider when we discuss the identity of what it means to be a human or just an individual. And think about how these designer babies will change the dynamics of society and culture. I foresee a future where permitting designer babies will ultimately create a solid, perfect caste system around the developed world, and it would happen indirectly. Let's say we permit parents to alter the babies to their likings. Those parents who can afford it will most likely already be in the dominant class. Those who can't afford it will still be flooded with naturally occurring genetic diseases and conditions right now. We fast forward a couple decades and we begin to see the long-term effects of having a program like CRISPR on the market for parents to design their babies. A high class perpetuated further from the lower classes through the years by means of genetic alterations. So how can physical genetic traits create this stratification? Eventually we begin to value those who are genetically edited over those who are not. To be natural is to be inferior to those who are created to be perfect. And we already see this in American culture. Many people look up to celebrities. In fact, they are usually the idols and role models of many young people. We see celebrities altering their images all the time. And we hold an aesthetic value towards those who reach the closest point of symmetry of their physical makeup, the golden ratio. Apply this value system to a race of humans who are all genetically created to reflect this perfect symmetry, and you would too see this application permits a widening gap of an already wide stratification between the classes. In closure, I will reiterate, it is not feasible nor ethical to permit the genetic alteration of embryos for means either arbitrary or for fighting genetic diseases in families. This is because genetic altering embryos leads to dependency on genetic editing programs like CRISPR, and because the permission of design babies will lead to cultural disruption of the meaning of human equality. Thank you.
And we thank the Leader of Opposition for his speech, and we welcome the Deputy Prime Minister, Timothy Williams, supporting Team D's to speak on behalf of the proposition. Hear, hear.
I actually recovered from cold, so mind the voice. To start off with, I would like to go and delve straight to deconstruction. He stated that physical inequality exists and that parents will selectively choose stronger babies. Well, if we look around the room right now in this very instance, we can see that physical inequality. Physical inequality is inherent and omnipresent in the human genome. There are roughly 7 billion people in the world, and an extensive number of genomes that can. So physical inequality is omnipresent. Also, we never said that the person who is inflicted with Down syndrome is of less value. That is morally reprehensible. Not stand for that. But we do. Well, why do you think when you go to the doctor's office, the first thing they ask you is, are your parents inflicted with Down syndrome? Do you have a history with depression? Does your grandmother have a history with depression? These questions are being asked because these problems are inherently genetic in nature. Yes.
So, you're saying inequality does exist.
Yes, it does.
But how does playing with the genetic code going to lead to more equality? Is my question.
This will level the playing field. The majority of parents who will go and enter this problem, enter the genome sequences, will be for selecting negative traits. There will be a minority of parents who will enter this program to enhance these positive trait characteristics. Affordability. Would you rather have an individual who's stricken with disease suffer 20 years of health costs through the healthcare system, through the corrupt American healthcare system, or go through a genetic edit that costs roughly $2,000? The technology is there and it is feasible. I will continue on this with my construction. But first, one more question.
How is it going to be affordable? How are you going to apply to those who really need it, aren't already in the system to get that right
The
help?
technology revolution is right here. In 1990, it cost $100 million to sequence the genome. Right now, it costs $2,000. There's a graph. It's going down. Negative. Yeah. So, there is a moral imperative to continue this research. Why? 6% of all births today have serious birth defects, genetic or partly genetic in origin. And gene editing can benefit up to 8 million children per year. 3% of all deaths are due to chronic diseases such as cancer and diabetes. Gene editing could lower the disease burden, benefiting billions of people in this world to current living individuals. So, even though there's uncertainty, there's a little bit of uncertainty, and that does merit some ground. There's uncertainty regarding the possible outcomes and greater harm when the genome alteration is accidental, and the harm may go unnoticed. However, interventions can be targeted and tested in wild systems, and predictions can be made in a safe and laboratory environment. Now let's talk about the feasibility and biological safety. But biological technical feasibility are preconditions for any next step to take towards development and implementation. Scientists are held to the highest degree of accountability, and they are the key actors in this gene modification. Work in the lab is subject to biosafety regulations and rules for good laboratory practice. The feasibility and safety are global, and the scientists in the laboratory must be held to the highest degree of standards at any given point. Yes?
Scientists are not parents, so how can they fix it?
No, we realize that science is not parents. The scientists have to offer the tools and mechanisms and options to give to the parents to enact these policies. So, there's an argument maybe that we're not technologically feasible to enter this realm of gene edit modifications. But considering the current technology we use today, all the technology we use has unpredictable effects on future generations. For example, 4G LTE cellular waves. We do not know the current ramifications that LTE has on our bodies in human physiology and anatomy. We do not know these. We do not know what potential harm could come due to these cellular waves out in the ether and the internet and being but we do not restrict the use or prohibit the use of cell phones because of the inherent or possible danger of, our genes being, and uncertainty regarding the possible outcome, Now, it might be argued that gene editing is unnecessary due to existing technology to eliminate the genetic disorders, such as in vitro fertilization, the pre-implementation genetic diagnosis, and termination of pregnancy, to ensure that couples have a healthy child today. However, this works well for single gene genetic Mendelian disorders, such as Huntington's disease and cystic fibrosis. But these diseases with a polygenic contribution, such as schizophrenia, would require increasing that would number in the hundreds of thousands. Pre-implementation of genetic diseases is limited by the parents. For example, couples may choose the unaffected child, but the possibility of transmission to the future generation is present if the carrier is transmitted. Gene editing will ensure that this new child who does not carry the condition to future generations, and thereby halting the genetic mutation. It is for these reasons we are proud to propose, and just think of the children. Do it.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech, and we welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Mark Rowley from Powdered Donuts, to close the top half. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, this evening I ask that you support us in our opposition of an experiment that has more in common with Nazi eugenics than it does modern, progressive. This debate comes down to three major points: money, time, and value. We believe optimal genetic modification can only occur in society with greater wealth distribution. We believe the time for the genetic modification of embryos is not and cannot be now. And we believe the measured advances in science are a reflection of reasonable and ethically responsible people, not this proposed unrealistic and dangerous jump for money-driven corporations. The cost of this is astronomical. It doesn't cost a lot to sequence the human genome because it's already sequenced. To just alter the hair color of a mouse is $4,000 for one mouse. That's not a genetically complex animal like a human. It is not curing a disease, and it does not take into consideration the monitoring and patient care that occurs for the lifespan of whatever individual is modified. According to the most recent U.S. Census, about 45 million Americans live below the poverty line. Obamacare, love it or hate it, was created for a reason. Americans cannot access affordable health care. Go ahead.
You mentioned Obamacare, which disallows insurance companies from discriminating against pre-existing conditions. Don't you think that nipping those in the bud at the genetic level would...
No, so insurance companies do not just pay for whatever you want to do. So currently, we can safely assume that this is for the wealthy because we already have old white males trying to dictate through legislature what a woman can do with her body, let alone what can go on in a human womb. Instead of helping the lower class survive, we are extending the lifespan of the privileged. Instead of curing diseases that affect our lowest common denominator, we are creating designer babies for the 1%. The American Medical Association itself states genetic interventions to enhance traits should be considered permissible only if there's equal access to the genetic technology, regardless of income. Even if genetic modification of embryos could be affordable, as the proposition would have you believe, what kind of culture would we be buying into? Longer lifespans means more people. More people means less resources. Less resources means war, at best. Also important to consider is the fact that physical manipulation is far more achievable in gene therapy than any sort of mental improvement. We can create beautiful, muscle-bound athletes to rage at one another while doing nothing to improve their ability to learn. We're talking about the business of childbirth. Will birth defects be refundable life? If many of us cannot fathom how celebrities come up with their ridiculous baby names, how can we co-sign their right to designer babies? While we support the rights of an informed, consenting adult to genetically modify themselves to the literal appearance of a Barbie doll or crocodile man, we do not believe any parent should have the right to force that lifestyle on their baby. Currently, geneticists prove capable of making glow-in-the-dark kittens, which are acceptably cute, but a glow-in-the-dark baby has to live with that. If you think parents won't put their children through that sort of trauma, you must not have seen Here Comes Honey Boo Boo. This is not to say we don't support alternatives and experimentation in genetic enhancement. Why not start with animals? Current technology for making genetic changes in developing mammals is primitive. Animals with altered genes have a higher rate of cancer, and it increases every single generation after gene therapy. The magnitude of genetic defects being introduced into the human gene pool might not be realized for several generations. The cell phone theory. Genetics have already granted us miracles. Prenatal and pre-implantation genetic testing can prevent gene-related disease. Adoption and artificial insemination are also socially beneficial alternatives. Embryo engineering is only the technology of choice for superficial enhancement. The key to these procedures are viral infections. The safest viruses used adenoviruses are the same employed by colds, pink eye, and pneumonia. I would like to leave you with the story of the first human death by genetic modification, Jesse Gallagher. 18-year-old Jesse had a genetic liver condition, but he wasn't sick. His condition was managed by a healthy diet and medication. He was recruited through his patient advocacy group by a business under claims that testing on adults would benefit suffering infants. Doctors infected Jesse with an adenovirus to affect his liver function. That night, Jesse suffered a 105-degree fever and was sick to his stomach. These were the expected side effects. When he made it back to the lab, he had already made his last I love you call to his father. His blood clot, his kidneys and lungs failed, and he fell into a coma. Instead of correcting his condition, the procedure had amplified it. As he lay dying, the nurses called the doctors who were researching on him. They were 2 hours away at home. When they got there, Jesse was stable. That meant he was still in a coma. He was now on a ventilator, and his condition was not 10 times worse, but a manageable 2 times worse. Both doctors went home and left Jesse's father there with them. Jesse became bloated beyond recognition. He was brain dead, and after 4 days of suffering for him and his family, just dead. The FDA, accountable organizations, accountable doctors, as the proposition would have you believe, concluded that scientists involved, including the director of the Institute for Human Gene Therapy, broke several rules. They failed to report patients who experienced mental confusion, nausea, stroke. The researchers failed to report the deaths of monkeys used in clinical trials. The 2 doctors who have since remained in the field had a $37 million stake in the results of their research, and little regard for Jesse. Big businesses driving medical experimentation has become the norm. The patient is not the person being held. Consider what Watson, the discoverer of that sequence of DNA, said before British Parliament in 2000. If scientists don't play God, who will? The New England Journal of Medicine has reported that for the 20 largest American drug companies, 50% of human trials are done completely outside of the U.S., with the developing world becoming a key destination. In Nigeria, with the outbreak of meningitis, a disease that's already cured and treatable, Pfizer ignored that treatment in order to try a cheaper alternative. People die. In the U.S., that would be unacceptable. And in other countries, they can't defend themselves in the same way. So, in closing, I urge you to support putting the brakes on this corporate agenda driving medical science, and urge doctors to consider their patients first before they start thinking about their ascension to godhood. The National Institute of Health puts it perhaps best. Gene therapy is not yet therapy. Thank you.
And we thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for his arguments, and we now welcome the Member Gov, Olivia Pigeon from Team Hammer, to debate for the government team. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to begin with a few points of deconstruction. That was a very heartbreaking story that you just told, but from what I gather, this was an 18-year-old man we are talking about. That has absolutely nothing to do with the rights of parents to deal with genetic modification. Second of all, you brought up women's rights and how they try to trample on them. The kind of say that you can't allow your parents to fight for their child the way they need to. Just the same way as you can give yourself up to an experimental cancer treatment. You have the right to do this, and you are aware of the options and the risk that goes along with it. Thank you. Anyways, I'd like to move on to my next point, where talking about the cost of these children. The average child to a parent costs nearly $225,000. Those are from the age of 4 to 18. This is just a number for an average child, one who needs basic food, shelter, schooling, and medicine. The average cost for a mentally handicapped child in their lifetime is $2.5 million. Many parents who have a child with a disability pay for these medical bills out of pocket. Internally, it's unfortunate to say that in addition to that, research shows that these children put an extra strain on the relationship with parents and any other family involved. Externally, any kind of disabilities impair society from flourishing to its fullest potential. We propose the idea of genetic engineering because of the situations like these that could be avoided. This proposal would lead to the betterment of and the convenience of the next generation of children, both children and parents alike. Yes.
So while I make an argument of convenience and you attack my examples that come from science, do you have any scientific examples of something that has benefited people through genetic therapy?
Well, the entirety of the opening position gave fully scientific evidence for that. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, thanks for your question. So the next point that I would like to make is the concept of diversity in society. People fear that modifying embryos will slowly dilute the diversity of society, but this would only be true if eugenics are being controlled by one single entity, which goes along, I believe, with something you said about Nazi eugenics. That was controlled by somebody trying to create a human weapons and this is from individuals who are trying to save the lives of their children or improve the lives of their children. It has nothing to do with some kind of genetic human Captain America type thing. But yeah, like I said, people fear that it's going to dilute the diversity of society. But yeah, it's not going to be controlled by a single entity. By allowing individuals to choose what traits their children should possess, the result is completely individual products. One parent might want a boy, a girl, or a redhead, or a blonde. One may want someone with darker skin, or one may want an albino. We simply do not know. Having parents paint their idea of perfection into society through their children is one of the greatest examples for diversity that we'll ever see in history.
Yes, if you eliminate people with disabilities, you eliminate the subculture, and you leave the people who are considered average or traditional to not become compassionate. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, that is not what I'm saying at all, but thank you for your question. I don't understand how a parent choosing a better opportunity and a better, healthier life for their children is considered not compassionate. What is more compassionate than spending a decent amount of money ensuring that your child is going to be healthy for the rest of their life?
Mr. Speaker, we believe that when a parent can alter the color of a child's skin because they believe that one race is superior and more successful than another, that there is inherently a problem with the society.
Well, thank you for your question. I'm not really sure why somebody who wants to perpetuate racism is probably not going to genetically modify their child to have different skin color. You mentioned white privilege, I believe. If we're talking about white privilege, then a person who is racist against other races is not going to genetically modify their child to be a different race as a minority. And people who are of minorities, I don't think that would be such an awful thing if they really, really, really wanted to change the race of their child. If they have the right to do that. And while it's, we might frown upon it in certain ways or societies, that's the way it is. But honestly, like I mentioned before, this is more about negative eugenics rather than positive eugenics, because parents are not going to drop
We thank the member government for her arguments, and we now welcome the member of opposition, Nate Graham, from the team Rebuttal Scuttle to advance the debate for the opposition side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I get into my extension, I'd just like to offer a little bit of deconstruction on the closing government's last statements. On our side of the House, we believe that diversity is good for society. When people are different, they learn to accept other people, they learn to work with other people, and they learn to value that some people are strong in one area and weak in another, and other people are vice versa to that, and together they can bring up a successful society. We would like to offer an extension in this round, seeing as very little time has been spent on this issue, and that is the child. The person that is being created here, and what say they do not have in the life that they are going to be forced to live. For one, we would say that the autonomy of the child is immediately violated by the government side. For one, the child doesn't get to choose the life that they have. You know, when you invest time and when you invest money into creating this ideal child that the parents feel is going to be, you know, mentally superior to other people, physically superior to other people, they're going to expect that this child gives back what they're expecting out of them. That means if the parent wants their child to be a doctor, if the parent wants their child to be a star in the NFL, if the parent wants an engineer, that's what the parent is going to get. And the problem that we see here is that when a parent tries to force their own views on the child is going to come up with a ton of problems that they don't deserve, and a normal child today typically doesn't have to deal with.
Essentially, the right of the child. Don't we already have a precedence that puts the right of parents over that of potential children?
I believe that because a child is a human and because a child is a person, they have a say in what goes on in their life. And we would say that if a parent is choosing the future for their child, that becomes an issue. Not at this time. I'd say that there's going to be unfair expectations that are set up for these children. The parents are going to be overwhelmingly brutal on their kids to be successful, and they're going to beat into these children what this idea of success is. Now, these parents can say, you know, we made you tall, we made you smart, now live up to that. You know, they're going to create this competition within the child that is just going to be terrible for society. There's going to be all these children that are now ideal and perfect, and now it's going to be what clothes you wear that's going to identify as what makes you successful, or what job you have that makes you successful, other than what type of person you are. We'd say other side effects is that you can effectively remove the heritage from a child. If you look at like mixed, like biracial marriages and the children that come out of that from two different cultures, now today that child is going to have two different cultures that he can identify with and be a part of. Now, if you say, you know, my child would be more successful as a white person than as a black person, you are essentially stripping him of his heritage and not allowing him to identify with half of it. The problems that are created here have been seen throughout history when we strip people of their culture and who they are. You know, you're going to create depression within these children. They're not going to know who they are or who they should be. And you create these problems and you say that it's for the betterment of society and it's the parent's right to strip a child of this. We would say that this child does in fact have a say in who they should be. I'll take lip speaker.
So are you saying that the child should be forced to identify with something that they have no control of?
We're not saying that they should be forced to identify with something, but we're saying they should have the option to identify with something. Strip them of the option to be who they want to be. Mr. Speaker, our next slide, we'd like to go on what happens with competition. You know, when we focus on who a child is going to be tomorrow, we forget that they're a person today. We forget that these are human beings. We forget that they have rights. What this competition is going to create is we're going to get children that are looking to get ahead of other people through entirely unfair. There's going to be problems as far as like materialism and what is viewed as like success and what is good for people. And we're not going to look at like who's a good person, or we're going to look at this one race as being superior to other people. When you take away rights from the children, when you make these people live a certain way and be a certain way, and that's not what they want, then you are creating these problems within their society. You're going to create an entire problem within these children. You're going to you're stripping them of their identity, of their culture, and this is something that they're not going to be able to get back. When they have kids, they're not going to be able to reimplant these cultural ties that they've had throughout history. And you're essentially going to create this superior race of people, and it's not going to be diverse. It's going to be this society's view of what success is, of what perfection is. And I'm not going to look at the diversities that make us different, that make society great, and the ability to work with others. You don't need to work with others. Everyone that's going to be successful is going to be just like you. The only difference is now going to be between these people that are successful is what they're wearing, who they're friends with, what they have, not who they are or where they came from, what insight they have to offer to society. Mr. Speaker, we feel that this has been completely overlooked in this debate, but we do feel that children have a say in what goes on in their life. We feel that they should have a culture. We feel that they should value their culture, and that when someone creates a culture for these people that is not of their own, the self-actualization will not be able to happen within these children. They won't know who they are. They won't know what to value. They won't know who to value. They'll just know, I need to be successful. I need to be this. I don't value other people that are not like me. We say that these are major problems that the government has completely overlooked and decides not to look at. However, we would also say that problems such as cancer, we're not going to debate you that that's good to get rid of. We would say that our problems lie in when you're creating races, when you're taking away things from people. And for all these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
We thank the member of opposition for his points and welcome the government whip, Madison Burgess, from Team Hammer to close the government debate. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight we have heard compelling arguments from both sides of the House. I would like to start by deconstructing the opposition. One of the points that was brought up earlier was the fact of the price of genetic modification. But however, given the fact that raising a child with disabilities is extremely expensive, the $4,000, which was the number that was brought up, is nothing compared to those expenses. Another one more directly related to the opposition who just spoke is that children are under their parents' control since the moment they are conceived. Children already learn from their parents' ideals, so even if they are genetically modified to be stronger or better at athletics, the children can then come out and be who they want to be. Even if they have those modifications, they can still be who they want to be. And then another construction point before I move into my construction, if the parents are acting in the best interest of their children, they will not feel the need to invest this feeling of competition in their children. If they want the best for their children, which is why they're doing genetic modification, they will not try to change their child as they come out. Now that I've finished deconstructing the opposition, I'd like to reinforce some of the points from the proposition. Like my partner Olivia mentioned, this argument is not about discrimination of disabled individuals in society. It's about the overall quality of life and the right of the parents. Because it is their child, and the state should not intervene with the fundamental rights of being a parent. Because each individual parent is already incredibly diverse, each background will lend itself to new and different children from different walks of life.
If a parent decides the future of the child before the child is even born, how will the child decide what
walks of life. And look where we are now, here at this university being extremely diverse. Another point I would like to reiterate is that a typically developed child costs, like Olivia said, around $225,000 from birth to 18 years of age. A disabled child costs around $2.5 million with all medical expenses as well as the rest of the expenses it takes to raise a child. Most middle-class families do not have that kind of money available, thus neglecting the care that the child needs or should get.
If most middle-class families do not have that kind of money available, where does that estimate come from? If it's not being spent?
That's a good question. It comes out of pocket, like we were told, and a lot of families can't pay for that, but they find the way through going into debt or whatever it costs because they are looking for the best needs for their child. Therefore, this goes hand in hand with the most important duty that a parent has, which is the safety and quality of life of their child. If they are willing to pay the $2.5 million to carry this child through, wouldn't they want the $4,000 or however much that less from 2.5 that would cost to genetically modify their child so that they don't have these disabilities? Thank you. We are proud to propose.
We thank the government whip for her arguments, and now we welcome the final speaker, the opposition whip, Catherine Hokie, representing the rebuttal scuttle. Hear, hear.
Honorable panel, we have heard many different opinions tonight. But this debate, the reason why we are here today is to discuss whether or not the parent should be permitted to use gene editing to modify their children. Today we have heard whether or not the technology for this exists. We know it exists. That's not what we're here to debate. We've also heard that cost is a big issue for these parents. This is not why we are here today. We are here to talk about the parent's choice and the child's choice. First of all, we think that if a parent does choose to modify their child with gene editing, they are taking away the child's autonomy. This child will have no freedom to decide what they should do with their life.
You keep referring to them as children. I just want to mention again, we're talking about modifying embryos. So it's not really the child.
Hear, hear. These embryos will grow to be children.
You're talking about child's autonomy. That child will still run and play and be susceptible to getting a bruise on a slide.
A bruise is not a disease. A bruise does not affect the child in the long run. What my partner has mentioned is that if you do gene editing on children, these children will be affected in the short term and the long run, which is what I will discuss right now. If these children have gene editing forced upon them, they will grow up to feel that they are superior to other children, to these children who society will now consider to be more traditional and therefore inferior. We believe that these children have the same right
bring up self-actualization of children, but aren't we talking about the rights of parents to modify embryos? What does that have to do with children later on in life and how they will self-actualize?
Parents have children to contribute to society. We think that if these children are modified at birth, they will grow up to not contribute to society as well as they could if these children were nurtured by their parents. We think that if these parents will do the gene editing before they're even born, they won't care about these children once they have been born. They will just let them be, and they will put them into private schools. They will pretty much segregate children from the rest of society.
Are you saying that putting kids in private schools is bad?
No, we're saying that is a form of segregating your child, and so is gene editing. Even today with lack of gene editing, there are still children around the world who are extremely competitive. These children don't grow up to know how to communicate with other people, to communicate with other cultures. We think that these children will grow up to be extremely materialistic, and they won't know how to communicate with the rest of society.
If there are already children who are in the world now who are not modified, who are competitive, how is it different when they haven't been modified?
The parents choose for these children to be modified. So these children will grow up believing that they are better than people who have not been modified. And not this time. And we believe that modifying these children from birth will put these children on a path that is not successful in the long run. You see this today. You see this with cultures who believe that people who are lighter skinned, have lighter hair, lighter eyes, are more superior than people who perhaps look like me. For example, if I want to be an English teacher in China today, I would have to submit a picture of myself, and therefore I would be judged on the spot. If my partner, for example, were to apply for the same job and I have more job experience, he would most likely get the job because he looks like he speaks English. He looks like he is more superior to me in this job position and therefore more qualified. And for these reasons, we are proud to
We thank both sides for their arguments. We welcome Mr. Steve Johnson.
I think another round of applause is in order for our engineers. You can see our judges are making their way out of the room. As they do that, I'll explain to you one of our traditions here at the Cabin Fever Debates. We model this style of debate after a type of debate that happens in the British House of Commons. It's called British parliamentary debate. And we borrow some of those conventions, but one of the conventions that's interesting that we borrow is that at the end of each debate, we have a division of the House. In the British House of Commons, literally at the end of their legislative debates, they decide whether or not the motion they're debating passes or fails by exiting the hall through one of two doors. One marked aye if they support the motion, another marked nay if they oppose the motion. I'm not going to make you guys go out and dig your door, but I am interested in what your opinion is about this motion. So in a second, I'm going to ask you if you favor the proposition to say aye, and if you oppose the proposition to say nay. So, all of those in favor of the motion tonight, based upon the arguments that you heard, that parents should be permitted to